Another journey, another ship. Kenny arrived in the United States on April 15, 1940. She had spent the past 5 years arguing with doctors about the merits of her treatment for polio. She brought her adopted daughter, Mary, as moral support and came armed with a legendary intolerance of criticism. It's hard to imagine what she hoped to achieve in America. Her first stop, New York. She delivered a lecture to doctors at Cornell University. They weren't impressed. She met the president of the American Medical Association. He thought she looked like a screwball. The tour wasn't going well. Next stop, the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. They thought she might be onto something and recommended she visit Minneapolis. Mary and sister packed their suitcases once again. Worn down by rejection, they put on a brave face as they arrived at Union Depot, St. Paul, Minneapolis. Could anyone have predicted that Minneapolis would be their adopted home for the next 10 years? Kenny demonstrated her therapy to doctors at Minnesota General Hospital. She couldn't explain how it worked, but they were impressed by what they saw. They also saw she was as stubborn as a mule, but they became her allies. They vouched for her, and for the first time, doors opened. America's wealthiest polio charity, the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, endorsed her treatment and provided the cash, a lot of it, that allowed sister and her adopted daughter to live and work in Minneapolis. Once again, Lady Luck was shining on Elizabeth Kenny. Hospital wards were filling with patients as America was in the grip of a polio outbreak. Newspapers wrote about her revolutionary treatment. Parents demanded access to her treatment. By 1941, Sister Kenny was becoming a household name, and she was voted one of the 10 most admired women in America. Her work in Minneapolis was catching the attention of doctors across the country. She was also catching the attention of the American press. Americans didn't know what to make of a nurse who didn't wear a uniform, or a woman who called herself sister but was not a member of a religious order. Kenny was an oddball. This made her perfect copy for a newspaper reporter. One reporter, Robert D. Potter, science editor for the American Weekly, thought he'd struck gold when she agreed to an interview. And what an interview it turned out to be. The piece that Potter wrote was one of the biggest scoops of his career. When Robert Potter interviewed Kenny in 1941, he asked her how she got started in Australia. She told him a story. A mother comes to Kenny's private hospital in search of a doctor. Her young son is paralysed. Kenny explains there isn't a doctor for 100 miles, but she'll try to help. After examining the child, she telegrams a doctor with a description of the symptoms. The reply is blunt. Case appears to be infantile paralysis, no known cure, carry on as you are. Kenny then explains her treatment to the mother. I try to use hot, moist packs to relieve the pain, and I try to start the training of the muscles to do their job again. I try to get the patient to relearn to control his muscles. The mother agrees to the treatment and the boy recovers. The story was perfect, simple, dramatic, memorable, and completely false. But fortunately for Kenny, he believed it. Better still, the American Weekly printed it. The story changed over time. Boy, then girl, then boy, then back to girl. The details of the telegram, the involvement of Dr. McDonnell, the rags that wells my legs. Her American audience especially liked the part in the later versions where a brave young nurse stands her ground in defiance to a disbelieving and narrow-minded medical profession. No one seemed bothered by the chopping and changing, and no one noticed she had borrowed the story from her Sylvia stretcher story from 15 years earlier. Little Sylvia and young Tom, or Amy, are the same character in a 3-act play with the same plot. A nurse is called to the aid of a stricken child. She uses her intuition to heal the child and resolves to share her discovery for the benefit of mankind. Was any of it real? No, not really. Even Dr. McDonnell's part is impossible to verify, as he had died 2 years earlier. So why did she do it? And what could she possibly achieve by creating such an absurd fiction? Think about it. You're past 60, and after years of struggle and disappointment, you finally receive the recognition for your treatment of a dreaded childhood disease. Why would you then concoct a completely fictitious story about discovering your treatment decades earlier in the Australian bush? What purpose could it serve? And why risk certain ridicule if your lies were unmasked? Could it be that a lifetime of risk-taking had left Kenny unable to recognise the consequences of her dishonesty? The key that unlocks the answers to these questions probably lies in Kenny's relationship with one very powerful man. Basil O'Connor was president of the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, the richest charity in America. He was also a close friend of President Franklin Roosevelt. It's not putting it too simply in saying O'Connor controlled the money and Kenny refused to play by his rules. When Kenny arrived in America, she underestimated O'Connor's importance. She focused her attention on winning over the medical profession. It didn't take her long to realise she was facing an entirely different opponent in America. In public, O'Connor promoted her work and paid the bills. In private, he loathed her. Awkward. She decided to appeal directly to the American public, the source of the Foundation's wealth and authority. Her secret weapon was her years of experience of self-promotion in the Australian press. She understood the power of a good story, especially a story that was beyond verification. Just as she had presented her ambulance stretcher as a gift to humanity 2 decades earlier, she now presented her polio treatment as a gift to America. And, just as she had turned her invention of the Sylvia stretcher into a story about herself, she now presented her polio treatment as a story about a nurse's tireless campaign to end the suffering of children. Basil O'Connor didn't stand a chance, or so she thought. The charm offensive worked for a while. O'Connor grudgingly continued to sign the cheques that paid for her expenses and the rising cost of crowded polio wards. 1943 turned out to be a busy year. In a National Gallup poll, she was voted the second most admired woman in America. In the same year, she published the memoir that secured her public image as a nurse who had selflessly devoted her life to the care of children. And with the help of Dr. John Pole, she finally produced the only comprehensible description of her treatment. She was riding a wave, but as quickly as she attracted allies, she collected foes. Kenny never learned the wisdom of the old saying, "You attract more flies with honey than vinegar." 1943 ended with Kenny infuriating O'Connor by publicly accusing him of starving the Elizabeth Kenny Institute of funds. He retaliated by cutting off all funds to her work in Minneapolis. Polio cases continued to mount across the nation, while two obstinate beasts fought for control of the care of those cases. One thing was certain: whoever came out the loser was going to be very, very bruised.